What I didn't even realize at the time was for every actor on stage, there might be 20 technicians. And you can make a really good living, a solid wage in a life doing something that's not, with the footlights
out front. Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you said, this is one of the reasons that BTU has started this initiative, because we want to not only provide opportunity, but initially make people aware that this is something,
of course,
that they could possibly do. Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Tunie, and I'm a founder of Black Theater United, and I'm here with scenic designer David Korins, and I'm really thrilled. How are you today?
I'm thrilled.
Good.
Really thrilled.
I'm really thrilled. We're thrilled.
We're so
thrilled to be here together. So, just before we really jump in, can you where were you born and raised?
I am from a town in Massachusetts called Mansfield, Massachusetts. It's like 40 minutes south of Boston. And I haven't been back in like 30 years.
Okay, I actually know where that is.
You do?
I do, just because I was filming in Boston a couple of years ago doing the Whitney Houston movie. And so we were shooting all over the place. And so I really got a sense of like where things are in the whole like Boston, Massachusetts area.
Yeah, I don't say I'm from Boston, which a lot of people from where I am would say.
Right.
Because I never felt like that was my city. Growing up, it was complicated and weird. And then when I came to New York,
interesting.
I found my place.
I got you. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, although I do still claim Pittsburgh. Go Steelers, I don't play. And I go home
Patriots,
a lot.
I kind of
Don't do it. Don't say it. Don't say it. But I grew up in Pittsburgh, and my family is still there.
I love the Burgh. So I've worked there several times.
Have you?
I have.
Okay, we're going to get to that. It's really a great city.
It is amazing.
As you know. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about scenic design. Listen, I went to your website to do, because, I believe in doing a little homework.
Diligence. Okay.
And like it blew the top of my head off, the work that you and your company does, because you're not just doing work in the theater, you're doing work in all the mediums, television, film, as well as theater, as well as immersive experiences. I was really blown away.
Thank you.
So can you just tell me a little bit how you started in this industry? What attracted you? Was it something that you always thought, I'm going to be a scenic designer, or was it something that kind of evolved?
I started out as an athlete and a musician.
Okay.
And when I didn't grow past 6'2", I knew I wouldn't be a professional basketball player, which was a little sad.
Okay.
No, I moved my furniture around as a kid in my bedroom, and a lot of people ask me now that I do this for a living, when was the first time you remember, that, or set design? And I kind of think back to that moment. I wanted to be a performer. I had a really bad audition experience. And when I went to college, I took some courses in beginning techniques in design, a little bit about lighting, scenery, costumes, etc. And I was kind of like an in-the-closet theater major. I was kind of taking classes, but not really specializing. And one of the grad students said, you should go to get an internship and see you have a professional experience. And so I went to this place called Williamstown Theater Festival, which I'm sure that you're aware of.
Yes, I know it very well.
Have you done work there?
I did, many moons ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's incredible.
Now I was an intern many moons ago.
Right.
But I quickly saw what it could mean to have a life or a career in the theater. And I loved it. And I realized that it was team building, and it was all of the things about sports and music. You're in a band, you have you've got plays, you're kind of going down the court of the field, you've got kind of a structure, but it's all about improvisation and all about collaboration. And so I started doing theater, loved it, loved world building, and then I realized that actually kind of what we do, whether it's what you do in the theater or what I do in the theater, is just all about communication and storytelling. And so I love the world building stuff, and the process of making things is kind of the same, whether it's a pop concert or a restaurant or an experience or a piece of theater or film. And it's all about a collaborator kind of like yes-anding each other and making something extraordinary together.
Exactly.
That's kind of how I got there.
And I'm going to digress a little because I just got back from Pittsburgh. It's celebrating my mother's 90th birthday celebration, and we threw an epic party for her. And as my sister said, you know, I directed and produced it and my sisters and my brother, they were my collaborators. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing. But I want to just go back to what you said about being an athlete and a musician in school, because I too was an athlete and musician in school. I was captain of my basketball team, captain of my volleyball team. I ran track. And also I played the clarinet and I sang in the choir. And, you know, so a lot of that public school education kind of gave me the beginning of a foundation for not just my musical component of my career and being able to like read music in fourth grade, you know, I'm able to read music, you know, but also the team sports, et cetera, you know, giving those leadership skills and that collaborative spirit and how to work together as a team, which I too have brought into my career as an actor and now producer director.
It's everything.
It's everything.
I agree with you. I think that collaboration is everything. And it's also sort of like know your lane, right? If you're a performer, you're not a designer, but you can definitely affect the design.
Absolutely.
And actually, some of my greatest moments in my career are working with a performer to actually dress out a world or an environment or whatever it is. And some of my highest praise that I've ever received personally is from a performer who would say, I know exactly who I am when I play this role, when I look at this desk or this thing, because it does a lot of dramaturgical work or detail work in the scene. And that is amazing. And so it's kind of like that overlap of storytelling.
Yes.
And it is a team. It's fully a team.
Absolutely. And you know, as an actor, I've always loved collaborating with the designers, whether it was costumes or sets, whatever, you know, the props, you know, particularly as a director, you know, communicating that and bouncing off of each other of how this world is going to be created and evolved, you know.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you say as a producer, in 2001, I co-founded a not-for-profit theater company, and we basically did it because we had just done all these downtown little shows, and we realized all of our friends who were playwrights were getting their plays kind of workshopped to death. And we thought, no readings, no workshops. If we like it, we'll produce it.
Wow.
And it was interesting because I now see the world as a producer, right? And I understand that if you spend a little bit more on the set, you have to spend a little less somewhere else or whatever it is. And again, it's another form of kind of team building because people don't realize that theater shows are kind of pop-up businesses. And like there, in the best version, there's real dialogue between a producer and a director or a writer, and you're thinking about kind of the economy and the best way to tell the story.
Absolutely.
And everything comes out of the same bucket.
Yes.
Right? So it's interesting to hear you talk kind of because you wear so many hats.
I wear different hats at different times, and I'm also finding that as I'm wearing, depending on which hat I have on, still part of my brain is thinking about the other hats.
Of course.
You know,
you cannot turn that off.
As a director, I'm thinking about the budget. As a producer, as, you know what I mean?
So, and were you always multi-hyphenate? I mean, I know you played 3 sports, but like...
No, but as you said, I mean, it kind of evolved. You know, I went to Carnegie Mellon, you know, and it's a very rigorous program, and I loved it. And it was the best thing I could have done. And there I had to build sets, and I had to build costumes, you know, and I had to run shows, and I had to be in all those different components, which gave me a great deal of respect for all those different departments. And anytime I'm working on a film, at some point, the wardrobe department, someone will say, "You do theater, don't you?" And I say, "Yes, I do." And they say, "We know because you hang up your costumes." And I'm like, yes.
It's true. Well, you mentioned it kind of at the top of the conversation. I work in almost every vertical of the entertainment industry. And I have to say, theater collaborators are the best. I think part of it is because we kind of come up like making miracles with like contact lenses and dental floss. And we
Exactly.
Go,
And it's like, my uncle has a barn.
yeah,
Let's
like
do a
real
show,
ingenuity. Like
Yeah,
I'm always
absolutely.
like, it's like MacGyver your way out of a problem, and it's not like throw money at a problem. But I feel like there's a combination of having to you have to drill down to the purest form of an idea so you can figure out how to execute that.
Yes.
And that makes for great ingenuity and great collaboration. Like the
Absolutely.
need for it. I know we get terminal degrees like Masters of Fine Art and things like that. I always think about it less as a fine art and more as a collaborative art, because in my mind, and I'm sure this is the wrong definition, in my mind, a fine art is something that you could go into a barn, do singularly. I can make a painting, a sculpture, a dance, and I could then show it to the world. Right. And what we do, we depend on people.
Absolutely.
Even if it's a one-person show.
Absolutely.
There are 2,000 other people who worked on that
behind the scenes.
Yeah, so I really think of that cohesion as it's like the team thing.
Absolutely. I want to go back to something that you said about early on. You started by rearranging the furniture in your room, and you wanted to be an actor initially. You were stepping into the performance world initially. But then you realized there were these other components.
Yes.
And that's kind of what this initiative we're doing here at Black Theater United is about.
That's right.
Because there are so many people who want to be a part of the theater, but they're not an actor, or they're not a singer, or they're not a dancer. And there are so many other arenas that you can step into to be a part of this community, scenic design being one of them. Yeah. Where did you study?
I studied at UMass Amherst.
Scenic design.
Yeah. It's a BA program.
Okay.
I had a very, very fortunate thing happen to me, which is that while I was in undergrad, I went back and forth to Williamstown over the summer, and I was learning skills, and I was bringing them back to my program. And I was fortunate enough to get asked to kind of join the MFA classes. Mm-hmm. So they offered a BA and an MFA. And for people who don't know, usually in undergrad, if you're really focused, you would go to a Bachelor of Fine Arts, a BFA program.
Right.
I didn't know that ahead of time. I didn't know that I was going to like it, so I entered into the school, was in a BA program. So I got the MFA skill set with a BA in theater. But I really believe in this industry, there's two kinds of education. There's the institutional education,
yes,
and then there's the practical education.
Absolutely.
And I was kind of getting both. And at Williamstown, you build 16, or at the time, you built 16 regional theater size shows in the summer, one a week.
Right.
Or 12,
right,
one a week.
Right.
And so by the time I left, after having been there for 5 or 7 years or whatever it was, I had built 65 or 70 big size shows and saw that process kind of front row.
Amazing.
And that was the real boots on the ground work. Mm-hmm. And so I could paint or prop or build or construct things, but I had no idea that it was about set design. I think I went into performance not because I always dreamt of being a performer, but because it's what we see. We could name 1,000 famous actors.
That's right.
But how many famous directors can you name?
Exactly.
And, people might say Spielberg, Scorsese.
Exactly, unless you're a Spielberg or a Scorsese.
But name one after that.
Coppola,
or name a famous theater
lighting
director.
Designer.
Or even less well known.
Yes.
So I just didn't know it. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts, didn't have that kind of access, didn't have the internet, aging myself.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, smartphone, what's that?
And on some level, it was kind of nice because the imagination was really free to run wild.
Well, that's why this program on so many levels is important, but I think we are speaking to a group of people who don't really know what they want. They sort of have a sense of a direction, but it's not laser focused, and that's who I was.
Sure.
And so I think actually kind of opening up the big tent and saying, everyone come in, like what I had, try a little of this, try a little of that, try a little of that, and find your lane.
Yes.
And what I didn't even realize at the time was, for every actor on stage, there might be 20 technicians. Uh-huh. And you can make a really good living, a solid wage in a life, doing something that's not, with the footlights
out front. Exactly. Yeah. And as you said, this is one of the reasons that BTU has started this initiative, because we want to not only provide opportunity, but initially make make people aware that this is something
Of course.
that they could do, they could possibly do. Yeah.
Who would have thought that being a set designer is actually a real job?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Because most people don't even think about it. They take all of that for granted, the world.
That's right.
They take it all for granted and they just focus on the performances. But somebody has to create all of that world.
That's right. And I think actually that is a thing that the internet has helped us with, because now if you even, come performance or director adjacent, now there are so many videos and other ways to kind of see behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
I remember the first thing I don't know if it's the truth, but what I remember is my first behind the scenes experience was they aired the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Oh, yes. I remember
John
that.
Landis directed.
Absolutely.
It was behind the scenes.
Yes,
it was
yes,
like a
yes.
30-minute thing.
I remember that.
I stood in my living room in 1984 or whatever year that was, and I thought that the making of, where you see like the prosthetics and the contact lenses, and you see the zombies drinking the Coca-Cola and they're like fanning the smoke, and it's in between takes, and the casting and all that. Hair on my arm is standing up as I tell you that story. It was the most profound thing, seeing the behind the scenes stuff. How they made the graveyard, how they made all that stuff. Now, obviously, the music video is thrilling also, but seeing that left such an indelible mark on me that there was that whole world of people making that environment.
Absolutely.
So that we could see the greatest music video of all time.
Of all time, exactly. So you mentioned Williamstown, which, do you know Bonnie Monty? Was she there when you were there?
No.
Nikos Sakharopoulos?
Well,
so this is
of course.
you knew Nikos. Okay, great. Bonnie was his right hand.
Got it.
But anyway, so through that process and learning all of that and going through school, and then when you stepped out into the professional world, was there anyone that you might have called a mentor that was somebody that you could pick up the phone and call, or did you have that kind of mentorship situation?
I was so fortunate because I got to assist so many designers over the year at Williamstown. And so because I think my first year at Williamstown, I was a sophomore in college. And so I kind of went in the summer, came back and applied to learning. Went in the summer, came back and applied to learning. And I did that a couple years in a row. And every year the designer should say, "You don't live in New York? When are you going to move to New York?" And so by the time I was kind of prepared to move to New York, I had the ability to call up some designers who were way, way ahead of me and say, "I'm going to move there." And my first goal was just get a job assisting. Just call someone up and get a job assisting. And I assisted a guy named Jim Noon, who designed many, many shows, including Jekyll and Hyde on Broadway.
Okay,
And I just worked for him as his in-studio assistant. And then others were Derek McLean, Alan Moyer, Alex Dodge. Like there were many, many people who I had met, John Lee Beatty, for years, just kind of working on their designs. And I just thought, if I could be an assistant first, I wasn't even thinking about being a designer necessarily. And eventually I helped paint shows and prop them and build them. And then as I started getting design work, the kind of assistant to design ratio inverted. And eventually, after a couple of years, I was able to make a living cobbling together design jobs.
That is fantastic. And that is also, one of the goals of our organization, and we're so happy to have collaborators like yourself, because, particularly Black young men and women, they don't necessarily have the opportunity to do a Williamstown. Of course, that's fortunately beginning to open up a little bit more. I mean, one of our initial collaborations was with Williamstown, but they don't have that. So they don't have the opportunity to make those relationships for when they step out into the professional world and be able to have that network that they can call on. So this is one of the exciting things that, one of the things we're excited about for this expo, this program that we're doing.
Yeah, and for me, my internship was such a seminal experience that when I founded my company, we actually created an internship, which we then, during the pandemic, lay dormant. But it was intentionally to give people who didn't have access to go up to, bucolic Massachusetts, and spend an entire summer doing that. We actually made little, smaller, like 6-month chunks, because what I found is it's so challenging to become an associate. There's a lot of education in between, applicable skill education, and that people who are showing up with only a love or an interest don't really have a way to rationalize getting paid real money, right? And so there was this kind of in-between white space that I felt like there needed to be a program where you could just sort of give people like a little taste. And hopefully at the end of it, give them applicable skills that they could then go on to become, if they liked it, a studio assistant or something like that. So that's, and there are some programs that are like that around the country, and I feel like that's where this will live, right? Because it's really sort of like a central hub where anyone can enter and hopefully find a spoke.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so you got the call for this initiative, right? And what prompted you to say, yeah, I want to be a part of this?
Well, first of all, the entire industry needs diversity, period, full stop. But I have always been a proponent of bring more people in. Right, it's like, it's right there on my resume. I don't do one thing. I don't just do the theater. I feel like we get better the more we do, and the more things we see, and the more people we're around. It's probably one of the things that like led me to this career in the first place. I don't go to an office and work in a cubicle, and every 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, there's a whole new crop of people. It's not for everyone, but for some people, it's amazing. You get a whole new family. And so to me, more is more. And I have always found that my work in the theater or in film or TV or whatever it is feels fresh, because people who tend to do one thing only know one set of materials, one set of building methodologies, one set of groups of people. And to me, I find and learn new things from a different industry, and then I kind of cross-pollinate. And I think it's the same with people. You know, it's like if you only have one experience with one group of people and one backdrop, it's, you know, what is that story about like traveling? It's like every country you go to or place you go to is like another page in a book. And we need more pages in the books. Period.
And what you're saying is a microcosm of what this country needs and what this world needs, you know?
That's right.
If you're only in one world, that's the only world that you know, right? So
yeah, and I think it's the same with stories. You know, great writers write what they know. And you can tell. I mean, I remember the first time I designed a show that had a cell phone as opposed to a landline.
Okay.
Right? And it's a new prop, right?
Yes.
And then I remember the first time I designed a show that had FaceTime and then the internet and all these things, right? Again, we're dating
as we
ourselves.
Evolve,
but like writers
as
write
the
what
technology
they know.
evolves.
You know, Noel Coward used to write about like mixing drinks with, you know, like adding ice cubes to a drink, and now people are like, what's an ice cube? You know, like so you know, you write what you know. But also, writers write what they know, and they write about their own experiences. And I think that that is what is so brilliant, in particular about the theater, is the tapestry of storytelling. And the people who tell those stories. We are midwives for writers' stories. Right? I mean, you are a writer also, so it's like. But like, I feel such a huge responsibility, and when someone comes to me with a new play or musical, it's like, I'm just kind of midwifing their baby into the world. Right.
You flatter me. I'm not a writer. No. You flatter me. I'm not a writer.
The day is young.
I have a file. I do have a file of things that I've been tabbling with. Yes, but I would not call myself a writer.
Well, maybe this is a world premiere right here.
Perhaps it is.
This could be the kernel of an idea.
I'm working on some things. Stay tuned. But you're right. It is midwifing someone's story into the world.
Well, I'm sure you feel it as a performer,
as a director and
also.
as a performer,
and a producer as a director,
too.
Really, it's like, you know, set designer. I don't really feel like if you design a set poorly. It's certainly additive if it's amazing. But I don't think a show's going to not have a future production because of it. But as a producer or a director, there's real weight in that. And I feel like, you know, how people see the first show really could mean a lot about the future life of the project.
Absolutely.
And that feels like it must be pressure.
But that's really interesting, you know, because what you're saying about the set, you know, because as we all know in the theater, a play will have several incarnations, right, before it might land on Broadway. If the gods are willing. And the set can start with something very simple, depending on the space and the theater it's in and what the director in this incarnation is imagining, how much imagination it wants the audience to use, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then as the show evolves, it might grow and get bigger and have things added, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have the show, if you don't have the show, it doesn't matter what the set is, right?
That's absolutely true.
Or the costumes are, or what the lights are doing, or whatever.
I think that might have been Sondheim's who said, like, lipstick on a pig, right?
That is
if you don't have the show.
Yes, if you don't have the show, lipstick on a pig. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. What you're saying is absolutely true, because if what the goal is Broadway or a commercial production, you certainly tend to ramp it up with bells and whistles and things like that. But I actually have always tried in my design work to kind of do the opposite, which is land the idea, and no matter what the cost of it is, whether it's $100 budget or $1 million budget, the essence of the thing should be the same, of the cracking of the code. And so, I, in my work, start with a scene breakdown that actually goes through every single scene, and I reduce it to the least amount possible. So if I were going to design this scene, I could say, what do we need? Do we need 2 chairs? Well, we are sitting down.
Right.
Is it crucial to have the 2 chairs? Do we need that monitor? Do we need this ceiling? Do we need this carpet? We need a camera and the 2 of us.
Right.
That's basically all we need.
Right.
No offense to everyone behind the camera. But I guess we need those 2 also,
yes, absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
So we need the 4 of us, the 1,700 of us. You have no idea how big this room is, kid. And that's it. And the rest of it is it's helping. But so this might be the Broadway production with the fancy marble table and all that stuff.
Right.
But to me, I always start with the least amount to tell the story. And that's why I think, again, to your point, crucial storytelling.
Yeah.
Do we need the window?
Right. No. Right.
But the window does add something.
A texture.
Yeah, and maybe there's time
and there
of
says
day.
there's an outside world there.
Totally.
And
And those are the conversations that I most love about collaboration, because the director ultimately is the true arbiter of taste. No, we don't need the window. I might say, window costs $200. Don't need it because
we
have
could use
to have
that for something
necklace.
else, right?
Right?
Exactly.
So to me, it's like,
yes.
Or 2,000.
Thank you. Exactly. As I said, I went to your website, so I know what you do.
Okay.
I know what you've done.
Now I feel nervous.
No, I know.
What do I do?
Oh my God, you're so amazing. So amazing things. But, would you talk a little bit about, okay, let's see. Let's do something not comparative, but theatrical. The Hamilton experience that you all built. First of all, where is that, or where was that?
It was in Chicago.
That was in Chicago. Was it near the pier, or?
Yeah, it was right by where the Bears play, right by.
Yes.
the stadium.
Okay. Yeah. Which was amazing, which was also immersive, but very different than the Van Gogh piece.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So would you just talk a little bit about the difference between the different approaches between those 2 things?
Yeah, I will say that much like people in the world, we are much more similar than we are different.
Okay.
Right? So I would actually say, from my vantage point, they're kind of the same.
Okay.
Meaning, we have an IP or a story that we're telling. In the case of Vincent's work, we're talking about a top 5 visual artist of all time, troubled soul, not a lot known about him. The story to tell is about his life and times, and about introducing really mass culture to his work.
Yeah.
The Hamilton exhibition, or Hamilton the show, is Lynn's version of the country then told by what the country is now through hip hop and the story of the founding fathers. But series of collaborators, singular goal, introducing an IP, and how do we best tell the story? Now, the Van Gogh experience was a lot about projection mapping.
Yes.
Right? It was all
gorgeous.
You got to step inside the paintings at a massive scale, poetically timed and choreographed to music. And it was about letting it literally wash over you like a meditation.
Yeah.
And a lot of my kind of fine art loving friends were like, why would I do that? I can go to MoMA and see, I can see Starry Night.
Right.
And I said, wasn't for you. Starry Night's also this big.
Yeah,
and
I know.
also
Right.
we had the Van Gogh, immersive Van Gogh in 36 cities.
I saw that.
1 in 5 Americans saw it.
I saw that too, which is amazing.
It was seen by millions
Zillions
and
of
millions and millions of
people.
people. And there were lines all over the place. And for many people, it was one of the most profound connections of fine art, pop culture, conversation, zeitgeisty things, and it was the most, it was the highest grossing experience in the world that year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it was in stark contrast to Hamilton,
Right.
which, was about, Lynn got a lot of conversation when we made the show about how he compressed 30 years of American history and all this stuff into a 2.5-hour compelling musical.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you write a musical, you don't talk about the 7 kids that Hamilton had. You talk about the
Exactly.
1 kid that Hamilton
Right.
had because he had to die in a duel and it was a dramatic license. And so he said, what if we made a museum-like experience that kind of was rigorously told with 2 extraordinary, the world's leading Hamiltonian and Jeffersonian historians worked with us on making that. And it was like a museum experience that had a totally different goal.
Right.
Right. Van Gogh was about, can I enjoy these brushstrokes and these colors and this kind of real kind of experiential immersion versus how can I tell the story of what was actually happening during the life and times of Alexander Hamilton and the founding of the country, in which you could choose your own adventure and walk through, and you could stay for 4 hours and read didactic panels and learn all sorts of things about the founding of New York and the country, and you didn't have to get out in 2 hours and 40 minutes because the show wasn't over.
Right.
Right. And so it was, but I love both of those things so much because they're storytelling.
Yeah.
They are taking people through an emotional and an intellectual and an artistic experience, and it's ultimately all about, for me, doing something that's artistic, educational, entertaining, and that changes the way that you see the world that you're in, right? And how, right? And isn't that what we do every day?
Yes, we would hope to have the audience come out changed
and
thoughtful,
I gotta say, the truths about the founding of the country are very complex, and the level of dream and vision that these 19, 20-year-old people who founded the country was so extraordinary. We still get to, live and benefit within their invention today.
Absolutely. And what is so complicated about that is that dream and vision was only for them.
Yes.
Not
course.
for others. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So it's so interesting how throughout the history of this country, that dream and vision has been, has been claimed,
100%.
by all of the peoples of this country.
And we know they did not get it right. We know
Absolutely.
that. But what's interesting is...
That's why there are amendments.
That's right. But before they existed, there had never been anything but a monarchy.
Right.
Right? So before they sat down and thought, hang on a second, we could elect someone, and that person could then choose to step away, Joe Biden, George Washington, whomever.
Yes.
There had only been a king. It was bloodline.
But let me ask you this. Did the French do it first, though? Didn't they create the idea of a republic?
No? I think it was not.
Or was it simultaneous?
I think it might have been with simultaneity, and of course we know both from the show and from the Hamilton exhibition that Lafayette was a huge portion about earning our independence to begin with, and there was a lot going on back and forth.
That's
and certainly
true.
Jefferson spent a lot of time learning all sorts of ideas.
That's right. That's true. Yep.
But I think that we forget that our 19-year-olds, of which I am a proud father of one of them.
Oh, God bless.
Thank you. When you think about the ages that the founding fathers were when they were writing these documents, and you think, well, text messages like emoji, thank you, hello,
right.
And you think about these ideas.
But it's so interesting because it seems it's the youth that always leads. I mean, I was at the International Black Theater Festival in Winston-Salem, right? That's every 2 years for the past 30-something years, right? And there was a woman there because there was a piece about one of the teenagers who was in what was called the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama, and we see the footage of them being hosed and attacked by dogs and beaten by police, et cetera, et cetera. And so the woman who this play was about was there.
Wow.
You know, she was there, and she was 15 years old when she participated in this. She was 15 years old. You know, so when you think about, you know, who leads the revolution, you know, it seems to be the youth. For real.
I also have a 15-year-old, and
can you imagine?
Barely, and I love her.
Yes, but right.
Yes, also yes. I mean, I think that we try and raise our kids to imagine.
And I see the young people. I mean, the young people they've been fired up. You know, they've gotten fired up after a few major incidents that, you know, we're all very much aware of, and they have been the outspoken ones, and they have been the ones taking to the streets and saying this is unacceptable. You know,
absolutely.
So it's it's interesting. It's interesting in that way.
When you are directing something, and you know, there's always those things that are either the Rosetta Stone that the playwright gives you, right? Like these pesky stage directions, whatever they are.
Right.
And sometimes there are descriptions, right, of the location.
Yes.
And it's funny, I love working with living playwrights because you get to phone them up and say, what did you mean?
Yeah.
You know, you're describing a room.
Yeah.
Is this, you know, and I find through conversation that they're talking about, they're saying, I'm describing the main character's room, and actually they realize, oh my gosh, I was describing my grandmother's house, or whatever it was. When you're directing a show, do you pay attention to those stage directions and the locale?
Yeah.
What do you do when you bring it into a designer?
When I'm looking at it, I usually, you know, I use it as kind of a foundation and a reference, you know, unless it's something like really integral to the story, really integral to the story. Otherwise, you know, I like to do my own, you know, dramaturgy kind of scenic stuff and reference and look at, you know, pictures and you know or videos of if something exists or whatever, you know, to bring a fuller experience and fuller picture. But what I will share with you is interesting because we are talking about how are we going to, you know, diversify the field.
Yeah.
And you know, I'll just do like a little flashback to my early days when I was on a soap opera called As the World Turns.
Yeah, familiar.
Some of you all may remember that.
I do.
And you know, and so my character had come to this fictional town of Oakdale in the Midwest to, you know, to be an attorney to replace the character who had been on the show for a long time, Tom, who was a lawyer. He had to go to Washington. So to introduce my character, they brought me in to, you know, hold down the firm for him while he was out of town. So I was a really, you know, smart attorney, you know, top of her class, I had worked here and there, and I was coming in and you know, all praise and all glory. And so I was a year or so into the show, and they wanted to introduce my family, and it had been established that my character was from the Bronx, right? And so the morning comes when we're going to introduce my family because my character is going home to the Bronx. And one of my colleagues, actor, white guy, came into the rehearsal process like fuming, right? He's like, Tunie, have you seen your family set? And I was like, well, no, I haven't stepped over there yet. He was like, come with me, you know. So we go to the set, and I look at it, you know, and I'm like, okay. And he says, well, we need to. And I was like, no, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
I got it, you know. So I asked the producer for the day to come in to the set with me. We were the only two there. And I asked her to take a look at it, you know. And she was like, okay. And I said, we have established that Jessica, my character, is smart, eloquent, classy, stylish, you know, self-made, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, where do you think she got that from? You know?
Because I'm assuming that the set
was dirty. The set had broken down furniture. The set had, and I said to her, I said, you know, this family may not have a lot of money, but they take care of what they have. And they are not dirty people. They would not live in a filthy home, and so they changed it and everything, but we had to have that conversation because, of course, none of the set designers had ever stepped foot in a black home.
Right.
You know what I mean? Of any economic level. You know what I mean? And I have said, particularly recently, right, because since George Floyd's murder, we're kind of like, okay, let's do this, right?
Yes.
Let's do this, let's change this, let's move this needle, and how can we do it, And so, my thing has always been, look, if you don't know, ask someone.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so the importance of having those voices in the room, right, is what we're trying to do with this program here, And as you were saying with the program that you had started with your company, was that part of the idea, the initiative, just to...
At first it started not with a lens for diversity, it started with a lens to give any young people the ability to enter the industry. And then through time, we were like, there's a huge problem here.
Okay.
Right. And so now we've actually just become allies with many more companies who are really and truly doing this. And I want to try and be a person and a firm who can actually give advantages to people who didn't have them.
Right.
I will say with regard to creating spaces, representing stories that are not like our own, it's challenging because I also wasn't a founding father of the United States.
Right.
And I'd still designed Hamilton. And
Right.
I also, wasn't around when Berry Gordy founded Motown.
Right.
I was fortunate enough to have the ability or the privilege of designing all those projects. But you're absolutely right. I think we need to take counsel, shut up, listen, and be open to the fact that there are others who know that world better. And then part of it, and it's kind of the beautiful thing about theater, is you always filter it through your own artistic sensibility.
Exactly.
It is not a photorealistic recreation.
We're
of
not
any
doing
of these spaces,
documentaries.
right? So
Right.
there is that version. But I definitely think that, when I moved to New York, I asked someone who had lived here for many years for a piece of advice. And I said, what should I do? I was intimidated. And they said, on every single street corner, you're going to see someone more and less fortunate than you. You're also going to see like a 3-part rock opera. Take it in. We all, as artists, express what we have lived and what our surroundings are. And so everyone has a different on-ramp.
Yeah.
And an experience that they're bringing. And I think visual artists in particular, but storytellers in general, are, the closer you are to the narrative that you're telling, the better version of it you can tell. And that apartment in the Bronx was made by people who had never been there.
Right, right.
And so I think you have to, especially as a visual artist, you really have to do extraordinarily rigorous research.
Absolutely.
And part of that research is putting yourself in a room with people who have done it. Or been there. And
Or who
be
have
open,
lived it, exactly.
egoless to render that into 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
And that is how I made Hamilton and also Motown. Because I sat in, I went to the rooms and I spoke to the people who made the rooms.
And Berry Gordy was alive and well, and you could ask him.
Well, and I asked him.
And you could ask him.
And I went to Detroit with him. So it's like, let's have that
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
But those experiences can only exist with verisimilitude with people who have been there. And seen it.
Exactly. I've been talking with David Korins. Thank you, David, for
you.
sharing with us the world of scenic design.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit us at blacktheaterunited.com. Black Theater United, creating pipelines for you, the future of our industry.